The aviation law is clear on this, sir. Title 9 of the African Civil Aviation Charter, Article 23b, prohibits interference with cabin crew in the performance of duty. But it doesn't exempt them from Equality Rights Act, Article 14, which guarantees all citizens equal access to services and dignity regardless of ethnicity or origin. The words, sharp and unexpected, hang like storm clouds in the pressurized cabin air. 8-year-old Kwamboka Akying stands in the narrow aisle of the full Nairobi-Lagos flight, her slim frame just barely taller than the headrests. Her younger brother Obuya, only 6, peeks out timidly from behind her, eyes wet with confusion and fear. The flight attendant, a sharply uniformed woman whose name tag reads Nadia, stares down at Kwamboka, mouth slightly open, utterly stunned. Every passenger in the packed Boeing 737 goes silent. You could hear the engine hum if it weren't for the moment suspended in disbelief. No one saw this coming, least of all the 3 high-ranking officials from a multinational oil consortium who, minutes ago, had loudly insisted that these children be reseated to the rear. But to understand how we got to this moment, how a routine Tuesday flight from Jomo Kenyatta International to Murtala Muhammad Airport became the scene of an extraordinary confrontation, one that would soon ripple across continents, we must return to where it all began. Just 90 minutes before, when Mama Akying was weaving her 2 children through the chaotic morning bustle of Nairobi's largest terminal. If this story is already speaking to you, subscribe to our channel for more African stories of courage, love, and awakening. Now, let's take you back to the beginning of this remarkable tale. Mama Akying checked her phone again. 10:42 a.m. boarding was in 18 minutes, and the security queues stretched like woven kitenge fabrics across the terminal, curling and nodding in every direction. She tightened her grip, Kwamboka's hand to her left, Obuya's in her right, while her shoulder bags slipped again from her arm, threatening to tumble as they rushed toward the final checkpoint. "Mama, are we going to miss the plane?" Kwamboka asked, her tone measured, a strange calmness in her voice, despite the urgency. At just 8, her eyes carried a knowing weight, the kind found in elders, not children. A burden of wisdom no child should yet carry. "We'll catch it, Mwana." "We always do," Mama Akying said, smiling down at her daughter, drawing strength from the girl's cool steadiness. Since her husband, Captain Otieno, had been deployed on UN peacekeeping duty 6 months ago, Kwamboka had stepped into an unspoken role, part guardian, part comforter. Her mother worried about the silent toll it took, how early responsibility etched itself into the bones. And yet they pressed forward, through the airport's ritual of shoes off, bags on the tray, arms up for scanners, with the quiet precision of a seasoned team. Then came the dreaded announcement. A gate change. From D6 to J12, nearly the farthest stretch in the international wing of Jomo Kenyatta. "Mama," Obuya whimpered, dragging his tiny feet. He had started the morning chirpy, but his legs were now heavy with the strain of the day. Without a word, Kwamboka bent her knees. "Hop on, Obi. The piggyback express is leaving the station," she said, her voice bright with mischief. He grinned and climbed on. Mama Akying adjusted both backpacks onto her own shoulders and watched as her daughter carried her brother through the throng of duty-free shops and immigration counters, past travelers sipping overpriced iced teas and clutching passports in weary hands. It was this vision, a small girl bearing her brother, holding her head high despite the weight, that made her heart ache with pride and ache even more with worry. They hurried past lounges and crowded gates. Ahead, the digital board at J12 flashed. Final boarding call, Flight 7N442 to Lagos. The airline clerk was already making the final boarding announcement in heavily accented English when they reached the gate. "Last call for all remaining passengers on Zenith Airways Flight 7N442 to Lagos. This is the final boarding call." Mama Akying handed over their printed boarding passes, slightly crumpled from her clenched grip. The gate agent scanned them swiftly, barely looking up. Their seats, carefully chosen weeks earlier when Grandmother Adiambo's illness first worsened, were grouped together, a window for Obuya to marvel at the clouds, the middle for Kwamboka to explain them, and the aisle for Mama to watch over both. They entered the jet bridge with the rest of Zone 3, shuffling past weary travelers and eager business types on their way to Lagos for deals and deadlines. The scent of warm metal, bleach, and the faint tang of sweat met them as they stepped onto the aircraft. The overhead lights flickered slightly, that familiar fluorescent flicker that belonged only to airplanes and hospitals. Seats 11A, B, and C, Mama aching murmured, eyes scanning row numbers. Here we are, Watoto. Their row was empty. The cool blue fabric seats still untouched. Just as she'd planned. A small island of peace and a long, silver bird. You get the window, Obuya, she said, nudging her son forward. Kwamboka, you're in the middle. But Mama, Kwamboka said, only half protesting, can I take the aisle just this once? Next time, love. Mama needs the aisle today in case they call me. She didn't say what they all knew, in case there was a crisis, in case her children needed shielding from yet another kind of turbulence. Not the kind that rocked wings, the kind that wore neckties and invisible power. Kwamboka nodded, always understanding too quickly. They stowed their backpacks under the seats with methodical efficiency. Belts clicked. Shoes shifted. The ritual of flight began. Obuya pressed his nose eagerly to the small, oval window. Outside, an airport worker in a green vest hurled luggage into a trolley with a kind of chaotic rhythm. One of the bags, frayed and brown, looked like theirs. Kwamboka pulled out the safety card and studied it like scripture. Her brow furrowed, lips pursed. She had started reading her father's, Understanding Our Laws comic booklets after a class trip to Nairobi's Parliament buildings. Ever since, she'd absorbed case summaries the way other children soaked in fables. She once told a bewildered teacher that Article 27 of Kenya's Constitution protected the right to dignity, and that included lunch breaks. Mama Akin glanced over. Her daughter, always thinking, always absorbing. They had made it. They were aboard. One step closer to Lagos. One step closer to grandmother Adhiambo, whose strength, like her voice, had once filled every room. The rest of the cabin was slowly filling. Behind them, a young Ghanaian couple settled in, giggling like sweet tea. Across the aisle, a woman bounced a sleeping baby wrapped in wax print. 2 rows ahead, a cluster of sharp-suited travelers already tapping at laptops as if time owed them something. And then he boarded, the man who would change everything. He entered the cabin like he owned the sky. Tall, neatly groomed, and wrapped in the kind of Ancre-lined blazer that whispered wealth without needing to shout. His shoes, fine Italian leather, gleamed like they'd never met dust. His bearing held the quiet arrogance of men accustomed to being obeyed. His name was Barrister Edwin Okonkwo, senior partner in a powerful Lagos law firm, and a name whispered with reverence in oil circles. Kwamboka didn't know all that. Not yet. What she saw was a man with silver at his temples and something hard behind his smile. He moved slowly down the aisle, glancing at seat numbers with an expression of annoyance, as if being among ordinary passengers was a mistake someone else would soon pay for. He stopped beside their row, looked down at his boarding pass, then frowned. Not a deep frown, just enough to suggest something beneath him had gone wrong. "Excuse me," he said, not to Mama Akin, but to flight attendant Nadia, who happened to be nearby. "I believe I requested a window seat." Nadia, still managing her welcoming smile, took his boarding pass and checked it. "Sir, you're in seat 14F, she said calmly. "That's an aisle." Barrister Okonkwo's face tightened. "That's unacceptable. I can't fly without a window. I submitted that request during booking." "I understand, sir," Nadia replied. "But this flight is fully booked. I can ask if anyone's willing to switch, though we can't guarantee." "What about them?" He gestured casually, dismissively, at Kwamboka and her family. "Surely the child doesn't need the window." Mama Akin's posture straightened like a reed bracing for wind. "We selected these seats deliberately. Months ago." He barely looked at her. "Nadia, perhaps you can sort this out. I'm a Zenith Platinum client." The way he said platinum, as if it were armor, made something cold pass through Mama's chest. That familiar chill. The unspoken message, your comfort is optional. Mine is guaranteed. Nadia tried to remain polite, her smile now taut at the edges. "I can ask other passengers, sir. But I cannot compel anyone to give up a seat they've reserved." Okonkwo's jaw clenched. For the first time, he looked directly at the family. Not with curiosity, with appraisal. And judgment. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll sit where assigned. But I would like a word with the cabin supervisor." He moved past them, but the air shifted. Kwamboka, quiet as ever, met her mother's eyes. She had caught everything, tone, implication, status games. Mama gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "It's all right, Mama," Kwamboka whispered. But they both knew it wasn't. The plane filled quickly now, mothers adjusting bassinets, students angling for overhead bin space, businessmen tapping impatiently on devices. The door closed. The plane shuddered slightly as it disconnected from a gate. Kwamboka turned to the window just as the safety announcement played. Lagos waited. And something else waited too. Something they hadn't planned for. Something rising like a wind before a storm. The engines rumbled to life, a low thunder beneath their feet. The plane eased backward, pushed by unseen hands, then began to taxi slowly toward the runway. Mama Akin closed her eyes for a moment, summoning calm. She hadn't slept well in days. Doctors said grandmother Adhiambo's condition was stable, but stable wasn't healing. And healing was what they needed to witness with their own eyes. Kwamboka watched her brother lean against the window, pointing excitedly. "Look, Coco. That plane is gigantic." She followed his finger to a massive jet idling nearby. "That's an Airbus A330, she said matter-of-fact. It can fly more than 11,000 kilometers non-stop." Obuya's mouth fell open in admiration. "How do you even know that?" "I read Baba's aviation magazine," Kwamboka replied, trying to sound casual. But her eyes glinted with pride at his wonder. Mama Aking overheard the exchange and smiled, the way one smiles when they're grateful the world hasn't yet knocked the joy from their children's voices. The aircraft rolled forward, joining the queue for takeoff. Overhead, the captain's voice crackled through the speaker. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Musa from the flight deck. We're number 4 in line for departure. Estimated flight time to Lagos is 4 hours and 15 minutes. Weather en route is calm. We'll be cruising at 35,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and thank you for choosing Zenith Airways." The familiar rhythm of travel set in. Kwamboka fastened her belt again, checked her brother's buckle, then leaned back and glanced at the laminated safety card once more. The flight attendants completed their walkthrough. Bags were stowed. The lights dimmed. Mama Aking tried to focus on the purpose of their journey. Her mother, proud, stubborn, unyielding Adhiambo, was lying in a Lagos hospital bed. The nurses said she'd regained some strength, that her spirit remained sharp. But Mama wouldn't believe it until she saw her herself. The aircraft paused at the threshold of the runway, engines humming with restrained power. Then, with a sudden surge, it roared forward. Kwamboka felt her stomach rise, her ears pop, her body pinned briefly to her seat as the plane lifted into the clouds. Obuya let out a gasp of pure joy. "We're flying." "Yes," Kwamboka whispered. "We're flying." The seatbelt sign dinged. The plane leveled off. And for a moment, the air was peaceful. Mama Aking allowed herself to believe the earlier tension with the barrister had passed. Just an unpleasant moment. Nothing more. Then the drink cart began rolling up the aisle. And the turbulence hadn't even started yet. The beverage cart rolled with its quiet clatter, bottles clinking, tiny cups stacked like coins from a forgotten kingdom. Flight attendant Nadia and her colleague Chica moved row by row, offering drinks with tight smiles and practiced ease. When they reached row 11, Nadia's warmth returned. "What can I get for you today?" she asked gently, kneeling slightly to speak to Obuya. "Apple juice, please," he said shyly. "Ginger soda," said Kwamboka, sitting tall. "Just water for me," Mama Aking added. "Asante." Nadia nodded, preparing the tray. She handed over Obuya's juice and passed the ginger soda to Kwamboka, just as the plane gave a light tremble. Not much, just enough to jostle. A small splash of soda leapt from the cup, landing on Kwamboka's sleeve. She blinked, more surprised than upset. "Oh no, I'm terribly sorry," Nadia said, already reaching for napkins. "These skies are moody today." "It's okay," Kwamboka said, dabbing her kitenge blouse. "Just fizzy." She smiled, trying to make it easy for the flight attendant to move on. The moment would have faded like mist, barely worth memory, if not for the same tremor, having reached seat 14F, just a few rows behind. There, Barrister Okonkwo's coffee had sloshed slightly, dark liquid touching the cuff of his expensive Agbada shirt. His voice rang out, sharp and too loud. "Be more careful with those drinks," he called, addressing no one in particular, but ensuring everyone heard. "Some of us are wearing garments that actually matter." The cabin stiffened. Passengers looked up. The laughter from earlier was gone. Nadia's hand froze mid-wipe. Mama Aking felt her spine stiffen. But it was Kwamboka who spoke, her voice calm but audible. "Mama," she asked with quiet wonder, "why would his clothes matter more than mine?" The question, simple, sincere, landed like a match in dry grass. Several passengers shifted. A young man, too, rose ahead, lowered his newspaper, eyes narrowing. Okonkwo leaned into the aisle, glaring at her with disbelief. "Young lady," he said, voice dipped in condescension, "when you're wearing a 30,000 naira tunic instead of some roadside fabric stitched by a street hawker, you'll understand the difference." Mama Aking opened her mouth, fury blooming in her chest, but Kwamboka, without looking at her mother, replied first. "But sir, the African Civil Aviation Charter says all passengers deserve equal treatment, no matter what they wear." Her voice did not waver. "And my blouse," she added, glancing at her soda-stained shoulder, "was stitched by my late grandmother. So it actually matters a lot." Silence fell like a heavy cloth over the cabin. Even the engine hum seemed to dim. Chica, the second flight attendant, hovered nearby, unsure if she should intervene. Okonkwo's nostrils flared. "Listen, child," he began, "I don't need a civic lesson from someone who hasn't." "Sir," Nadia interjected quickly, her voice firm and diplomatic, "we still have drink service to complete. Would you like something to drink?" It was a gentle shift, a redirection, an attempt to lower the flame. But the ember had already been lit. Okonkwo turned away with a hiss of breath. "Yes," he said flatly. "Coffee. Black. And far from children who speak out of turn." The words hung there, bitter as burnt beans. Mama Aking gripped her seat's armrest, but Kwamboka simply turned back to her ginger soda, stirring it gently with the straw, her face unreadable. The sky outside remained calm, but inside the plane, something unseen had begun to swirl, a wind, a reckoning, a tide waiting for the right moment to rise. For several long minutes, silence held the cabin like a taut drumskin. Passengers resumed their rituals, browsing duty-free magazines, flicking through movie selections, unwrapping earphones. But underneath it all, something had changed. There was a new awareness, a shift in the way eyes darted, in the space between words. Mama Aking kept one hand on her lap, the other gently stroking Obuya's head. Her boy had grown quiet, curled into her side like a small antelope sensing predators nearby. But Kwamboka, she sat straight, unblinking, her ginger soda now halfway gone. Then Okonkwo coughed loud, deliberate, and said, "I hope there will be no further delays caused by overzealous child activists today." Several heads turned. One woman, in a deep purple ghillie, narrowed her eyes and resumed fanning herself with the flight safety card. Kwamboka slowly turned toward her mother. "Mama." "Yes, love." "If someone is being unkind and they keep being unkind, is it still okay to stay quiet?" The question held no bitterness, just pure cutting inquiry, the kind that swells from a place of dignity too young to be this sharp. Mama Aking swallowed. Sometimes silence is strength, and sometimes it's surrender. Kwamboka nodded, then reached down into the side pocket of her small backpack and pulled out a folded pamphlet. Its title read, "The People's Charter, Rights in the Skies," printed by a grassroots legal collective in Nairobi that did community education through comic-style booklets. She flipped to a bookmark page. "Passengers have the right to a safe, respectful flying environment regardless of ethnicity, gender, age, or attire," she read aloud, just above a whisper. Mama Aking raised an eyebrow. "You brought that on the plane?" Kwamboka looked up, eyes clear. "I bring it everywhere." 2 rows ahead, a man in a checkered shirt chuckled softly. Okonkwo shifted in his seat, pretending not to hear. Then, the plane trembled again. Just a bump. But this time, Obuya's small cup tipped slightly, and a bit of apple juice splashed onto his khaki pants. "Ah," he yelped, startled. "It's okay," Kwamboka said quickly, grabbing a napkin. "We'll clean it." But even as she blotted the stain, another voice cut through. "Well, I suppose they'll start demanding compensation for spilled juice next," Okonkwo muttered, just loud enough. That was it. The line drawn in the sky. Kwamboka stood. Not fast. Not defiant. She stood like a person called to speak truth. Her hands didn't tremble. She turned to face him. Calm. Controlled. "Sir," she said, "I am not your servant. And we are not your inconvenience." Someone gasped softly. "You may have a law degree," she continued, "but that doesn't make you more important than my brother. Or my mother. Or any of us." Okonkwo stared at her, blinking as if slapped by wind. "Who do you think you are?" he asked, incredulous. Kwamboka didn't hesitate. "I am a child of this continent. And I know the law, too." Then, as if orchestrated by ancestors themselves, the plane gave another small bump, the kind that steadies the soul, not startles it. Passengers turned, now openly watching. Obuya sat up. And in the center of it all, Kwamboka stood like a single flame in still air, small but unmistakably burning. Okonkwo leaned forward slowly in his seat, hands clasped as though steepled in judgment. "You clearly have spirit, little girl," he said, voice dipped in arrogance. "But spirit without respect is dangerous. You ought to sit down and let your mother deal with adult matters." Kwamboka didn't blink. "My mother has dealt with adult matters all her life. I've just learned from her." Behind them, a woman wearing braided cornrows and a baby sling gave a small clap. Just once, but loud enough. Okonkwo narrowed his eyes, voice lowering. "You don't understand the world you're trying to fight. There are levels here. Power isn't just talk." "I know," Kwamboka replied. "Power is action, and silence is what lets wrong people keep theirs." Someone from the back murmured, "Eh," with the soft satisfaction of hearing a sermon land on truth. Mama Aking reached up and lightly touched her daughter's wrist, not to stop her, but to steady her. The girl had become wind and root at once. Okonkwo looked around, suddenly aware that the air had changed, that the crowd was no longer indifferent, that his suit and platinum status no longer held the center. He tried again. "You've taken a few words from a comic book and now think you understand law. You don't even have the right to speak to me like this." Kwamboka reached into her bag, pulled out a small, neatly folded paper, and held it up like a precious scroll. "Article 14, Section D of the East African Aviation Bill of Rights," she declared clearly, "gives every passenger the right to dignity and non-discrimination, regardless of age, class, or what they wear." She looked at the flight attendant now, standing a few rows away. "I am not interfering with staff. I am responding to harassment." The flight attendant blinked, lips parted. She nodded slowly. A man across the aisle, maybe Nigerian, maybe Ghanaian, leaned forward and said to no one in particular, "That child should be teaching civics in Abuja." Chuckles rolled softly through the cabin. Okonkwo, suddenly aware that he had lost the room, sat back in his seat. He didn't speak. He didn't meet anyone's gaze. For the first time, Mama Aking saw the edges of his confidence shrink inward. Not collapse, but contract, as if someone had opened a window and let in fresher air. And then came the ripple. A slow clap, from the woman in the purple ghillie. Then another, from the man with the newspaper. Then a few more, tentative but growing, until the cabin echoed with warm, rising applause. It wasn't thunderous. It wasn't forced. It was the sound of people choosing a side. Kwamboka blinked, not because she was surprised, but because she felt the tears trying to rise and refused to let them fall yet. She sat down slowly, smoothing her skirt. The applause died down. Mama Aking leaned in and kissed the crown of her head. "My daughter," she whispered, "you are becoming." The cabin had settled into a hum, not the quiet of peace, but of people re-watching history unfold from just a row away. Phones weren't out yet, but eyes were sharper, back straighter. The flight had just passed over Cameroon, the captain announced, cruising steady now, the sky stretched like blue cloth above. Obuya squirmed in his seat. "Mama," he whispered, "I need the bathroom." Mama Aking stood to help him, but Kwamboka was already moving. "I'll take him," she said gently, hand out. Their mother paused, then nodded. Together, the two children made their way down the aisle toward the mid-cabin restroom. Passengers shifted to let them through. Kwamboka knocked, waited, and then ushered her brother inside. While she stood outside waiting, arms folded, Okonkwo rose from his seat. He didn't walk quickly, no, he moved like a man reclaiming ground. He approached the lavatory aisle, paused beside her. "You're very bold," he said. Kwamboka didn't respond. But boldness can be dangerous, especially for little girls who don't know when to stop. He started to walk past her, brushing too close, shoulder grazing hers. It was small, slight, but intentional. She turned sharply, voice like a blade. "Do not touch me again." Passengers nearby froze. The baby in the sling began to fuss, perhaps sensing the tension. Okonkwo raised both hands. "Calm down. I didn't touch you. You brushed me deliberately." "That's nonsense." She said, "Don't touch her," came a voice. Not loud, but firm. It was the woman in the purple ghillie, now unbuckling her seatbelt. "And you've been bothering her since we left Nairobi." Okonkwo scoffed. "You people just—" "What people?" another man asked. His tone held warning. Obuya opened the lavatory door just then, and Kwamboka quickly guided him out, placing herself between her brother and the barrister like a lioness in the tall grass. The aisle now felt narrower. Then came a calm, strong voice, one built like marble. I need both of you to return to your seats. It was Michael, the lead flight attendant. Older, measured, the kind of man whose presence asked for stillness without ever raising his voice. Kwamboka turned to him. He brushed against me, deliberately, she said, after warning me not to speak anymore. Michael looked at Okonkwo, who opened his mouth, then closed it. Passengers stared. No one pretended to nap anymore. Return to your seats, Michael repeated, this time with a sharper edge. Okonkwo glared but complied. As he passed back to his row, he muttered just loud enough. This is what happens when you let children think they're lawyers. And then came the softest voice from an elderly woman seated beside the window. This is what happens when grown men forget they are. It was so quiet, and yet it landed with the weight of thunder. Laughter burst from 3 rows. Controlled, stifled, but real. Okonkwo sat down, jaw tight. Kwamboka led Obuya back to their row, heart beating like a drum in a naming ceremony. Mama Aking looked at her daughter, as if seeing her anew. And in that moment, just for a flicker, something sacred passed between mother and child, not pride, but power shared. The quiet didn't last. 15 minutes after the restroom encounter, Michael, the lead flight attendant, appeared again, this time kneeling beside Okonkwo's seat with a notepad and furrowed brow. Passengers stole glances, the kind that pretended not to listen, but heard every word. She's become disruptive, Okonkwo was saying, gesturing toward row 11, interfering with the crew, creating unnecessary conflict. Michael raised an eyebrow. She's a child. A child quoting legal codes and making accusations in public airspace. I witnessed no interference, Michael said evenly. She challenged me loudly. Stirred unrest among passengers. It seems to me, sir, you've contributed to that unrest. Okonkwo leaned in. I don't appreciate the implication. Michael stayed calm. I don't deal in implication, Mr. Okonkwo. I deal in observation. And I've observed a passenger, a child, responding with clarity and calm to provocation. I want it on record, Okonkwo snapped. This flight has failed to ensure a respectful environment for all passengers. Michael wrote something down slowly. Duly noted. As he stood, a hand reached out from across the aisle, the woman in the purple ghillie again. She didn't provoke anything, the woman said. That man's been pressing her from the minute he boarded. I saw it too, said a man in a kufi hat 2 rows back. I was behind her during the drink service, added another voice, this time a soft-spoken Ethiopian woman. She apologized for the turbulence. He insulted her clothing. Michael turned to each one, nodding, taking names. It was no longer a question of belief. It was a record. Kwamboka sat still through it all, staring ahead, lips tight. She didn't revel in vindication. She didn't even smile. Her small hands were folded in her lap, like a judge waiting for proceedings to end. Obuya leaned against her shoulder, whispering, Are we in trouble? No, Obi, she murmured. Truth doesn't get us in trouble. Just noticed. Michael approached their row now. I want to thank you, Kwamboka, he said, crouching, so they were eye to eye. You've been clear and composed. And correct. Mama Aking exhaled for the first time in an hour. If there's anything you need, Michael added, let me know. Kwamboka nodded once, like a soldier receiving a command. No victory. No celebration. Just readiness. As Michael turned to go, another passenger, a professor returning from a legal symposium in Addis, called out, Can I see that charter she quoted earlier? Kwamboka pulled it from her backpack and passed it down. He examined it, nodded slowly, and looked back at her. Well, he said, half smiling. Now I know who's going to take my job one day. A ripple of chuckles rolled through the rows. Even Mama Aking laughed, soft, the kind that releases pressure without releasing guard. Okonkwo said nothing. His face was still. But across the cabin, something had tilted. The plane remained steady, but the story inside it was shifting. And more eyes than ever were watching and remembering. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane flew over the Bainway River, a ribbon of silver cutting through green earth far below. Inside, the air had shifted, not tense now but taut. Like everyone was waiting. And then, Kwamboka stood. She didn't rise with drama. No fanfare. No permission sought. She stood because truth called her to her feet. Passengers nearby paused their movies. The man in the kufi quietly put away his book. Even the baby stopped fussing. Kwamboka walked a few steps into the aisle, just enough to face both the front and back of the plane, and spoke. Passengers of Flight 7N442, she began, her voice clear and strong. My name is Kwamboka Aking, and I'm 8 years old. A few people leaned forward. I am not here to entertain or disturb. I am here because dignity matters, no matter how young you are, or where you sit, or what you wear. The flight attendants paused mid-cart, watching. Michael gave a subtle nod from a galley. Kwamboka raised her folded paper, the People's Charter. This document says I have the right to be respected, to be heard, and not to be pushed or spoken to like I am less. She turned slightly, addressing the rows behind her. This is not just about me. It's about my brother, who was called an inconvenience. My mother, who has worked too hard to be ignored. And it's about every girl like me, told to shrink, to stay quiet, or to disappear. Silence. Not heavy this time, reverent. Injustice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It shifts blame. It hides behind fancy suits and platinum cards. She looked directly toward Okonkwo. I am not afraid of suits. Or of silence. Then, folding her paper slowly, she added, I am afraid of forgetting who I am. A woman near the back began to clap. Then another. Then more. The sound spread like bushfire, not loud, but unstoppable. Applause filled the plane. Some passengers cheered softly. A few wiped tears. One man took out his phone, began to record discreetly, not for gossip but for memory. For proof. Okonkwo stayed in his seat, arms folded. But even he could not look directly at the girl he had tried to silence. Mama Aking watched, stunned. She had known her daughter was wise. She had known she was lightning. Kwamboka returned to her seat without expression, as if she had simply read a poem or recited a verse. But in her bones, she felt it, something ancient and holy. Power had shifted. Not through rage, through truth. And the sky, vast and open beyond the window, carried her words onward. The plane touched down in Lagos just before sunset, tires kissing the tarmac with a low growl. The cabin broke into polite applause, not for the landing, but as if to thank the sky for delivering them safely through more than just turbulence. Mama Aking reached across and took Kwamboka's hand, squeezing it tight. You did well, Mwana. Kwamboka didn't smile, but her grip answered, we did. As the passengers stood and shuffled toward the exit, Michael, the flight lead, came by one last time. He knelt beside their row. Your daughter, he said softly, reminded this whole plane of something we forget too often. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small card. This is mine. If you ever need anything, school letters, recommendations, anything at all, just ask. Mama Aking nodded slowly. Asante Ndugu. They stepped into the tunnel of the jet bridge and emerged into Murtala Muhammad Airport, noisy, hot, and heavy with movement. People pressed in all directions, families, customs officers, travelers with bright Ankara suitcases and tired shoulders. At the arrival's gate, they found Uncle Bayo waiting, eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk searching for kin. When he saw them, his face lit up. You made it, he cried, scooping Obuya into his arms. Mama hugged him briefly. How is she? Stronger today, he said. She's waiting for you. They packed into his old Toyota, dusty, loyal, still decorated with a dashboard rosary and faded Bob Marley sticker. As they drove toward LUTH Hospital, a strange buzz began vibrating through Uncle Bayo's phone. Then Mama's. Then, astonishingly, Kwamboka's old basic smartphone, which had been off during the flight. Each ping was louder than the last. Why is my phone going crazy? Mama asked. Uncle Bayo glanced at his screen. Oh ho, he muttered. This girl. He turned to look at Kwamboka, now quiet in the back seat. It's already online. That speech. Someone filmed it. Kwamboka blinked. What speech? The one in the aisle, he laughed. You're everywhere already. Twitter, TikTok, even Channels TV. Mama opened her screen. There it was, #SkyGirlSpeaks, trending with thousands of views. She watched in silence as the clip played, her daughter standing tall, speaking as if the ancestors whispered every word through her. And in the quiet after, as Lagos traffic buzzed around them, her phone buzzed again. It was a WhatsApp call from Charles, her husband, streaming in from South Sudan, where he'd been deployed with the AU peacekeeping forces. She answered, heart racing. Are you all okay? Charles asked. His face filled the screen, dusty, tired, but shining. We're fine, Mama said, holding the camera to show both children. We're safe. Then he saw the notification banner flash across her screen. Zenith Airlines passenger goes viral for in-flight speech on dignity. He raised an eyebrow. What happened on that plane? Kwamboka leaned into the camera. Nothing, Baba, she said. Just justice. Charles stared for a beat, then laughed so hard the connection glitched. You're your grandmother's child, he said proudly. By the time they arrived at the hospital, the sun had dropped behind the Lagos skyline. But inside one room, Grandmother Adhiambo, thin and fierce-eyed, sat propped against a pillow, her fore gently pulsing. When she saw them, her eyes watered. My lionesses, she whispered, arms out. And for the first time since Nairobi, Mama let herself cry. By dawn the next morning, the story had outgrown the girl. Young Kenyan girl challenges power on Lagos flight. Sky Girl, the child who spoke truth at 35,000 feet. Daughter of Africa speaks for us all. Headlines raced across platforms in English, Swahili, Yoruba, Zulu, and even French. From Cape Town to Cairo, the video was shared with captions like, May our daughters be brave like her, and Aking taught the sky to listen. Offers followed quickly. A law professor from the University of Ibadan wanted to nominate her for a Civic Youth Medal. The African Bar Association released a statement praising her for moral clarity and legal literacy beyond her years. And then came an email from Harvard Law School requesting to feature her in their International Human Rights Youth Lecture Series. Mama Aking read that 3 times before closing the laptop gently. Kwamboka sat nearby on Grandmother Adhiambo's hospital bed, reading aloud from a children's book about African queens. Her voice was steady, soft. When Mama told her about Harvard, she didn't look up. Do I have to go give another speech? She asked quietly. No, Mama said. You don't have to do anything. You've already done enough. But others weren't ready to let go. By midday, reporters had gathered near the hospital gates. A news van idled outside, its satellite dish turning like a curious giraffe. Aunties brought fruit and said, We saw her. That girl. That's your daughter. The hospital placed the family in a private room, not for safety, but for space. Inside, the visitors came like a parade of gratitude. First came the law professor from a flight, the one who had asked to see her charter. He brought an embossed copy of the African Children's Rights Accord and a letter inviting Kwamboka to visit the university. Then came Captain Musa, the pilot of Flight 7N442. He removed his hat before entering. I've flown 200,000 nautical miles, he said, but I've never seen such stillness in the sky as when your daughter spoke. He left behind a gold pin, the wings from his own Zenith Airlines uniform. Then came Justice Temiteo Aluko, retired Supreme Court judge, and one of the first women in Nigeria to hold such a post. She bent low to greet Kwamboka. They say you're the child lawyer, she smiled. I just read what my father gave me, Kwamboka said. Well, child, the judge replied, placing a hand on her shoulder, then your father has planted a forest. Even the airline's regional director arrived, not an apology, but reverence. He handed Mama a sealed envelope with lifetime travel vouchers and scholarship application. Still, through it all, Kwamboka said little. She sat beside her grandmother, held her brother's hand, and watched her mother do what mothers do: protect, interpret, filter the noise of the world from the heart of a child. Because it wasn't just the world that had changed. It was their home, the space between them, filled now with new responsibilities and deeper quiet. Late that night, just as the reporters had gone and the city hushed under moonlight, a final visitor arrived. Congresswoman Esi Lewis, Ghanaian-born, Lagos-raised, now representing a West African bloc in the Pan-African Assembly. She brought no cameras, no reporters, just a notebook and her driver. I watched that video a dozen times, she told Mama Aking, and I've never seen a child carry the Constitution like a flame. She turned to Kwamboka. We're building a youth advisory council, voices to help guide justice reforms. Would you consider joining us? Kwamboka looked to her mother. Mama Aking smiled softly. Only if she wants. Kwamboka nodded once. But only if I can still do my homework. The congresswoman laughed. You'll lead the meetings. And just like that, the girl who had stood in an airplane aisle was being asked to help steer a continent's course. 3 months later, Kwamboka Aking stood at a wooden podium beneath the domed ceiling of the Pan-African Assembly in Addis Ababa. The room was vast, lined with flags and elders in suits and Kent shawls. But she did not fidget. She wore a crisp white dress pattern with tiny Adinkra symbols and a beaded necklace her grandmother had gifted her 2 nights before she passed. Her hands didn't shake. She took a breath. My name is Kwamboka Aking. I am a daughter of Kenya, a student of justice, and the granddaughter of a woman who told me never to whisper when truth needs a voice. The hall, quiet and reverent, held its breath as she continued, calling for rights-based airline policies, protections for youth in public spaces, and broader civic education for African children. When she finished, the applause rose like a chorus in the savannah, wide, warm, without end. Across the continent, screens lit up. Even Zenith Airways, in a quiet act of accountability, added a new in-flight policy, the Kwamboka Clause, affirming protections against passenger profiling and verbal harassment. But Kwamboka didn't chase the headlines anymore. She was back in Nairobi, back in school, where she walked beside her classmates unnoticed except for the occasional double take. At home, the wings pin given by Captain Musa hung on her wall beside a picture of grandmother Adhiambo, who had passed peacefully 2 weeks after they arrived in Lagos, her final smile full of mischief and knowing. Obuya was still spilling juice and dreaming of planes. And Mama Aking? She was back at her desk in a county clinic, healing strangers, raising her children, and watching her daughter become not famous, but rooted. One evening, after dinner, Kwamboka sat beneath the Magumo tree behind their flat, reading out loud to herself. Her father called via satellite, and she told him about debating with university students and reading petitions. You're leading big people now, he teased. No, she said, smiling. I'm just speaking where people forgot children could stand. He was quiet a moment. Then, the world will remember you, my daughter. But remember too, power is not speaking loudly. It is knowing when silence is sacred. That night, Kwamboka wrote those words in her notebook. And when the next girl, in another town, another flight, another school, would be told to sit down and be small, she would remember. There once was a girl who stood in the sky and spoke the law into thunder. And the sky, and all beneath it, listened.